Oh, you lovely, lovely people. Thank you, Stephen. You know, my thought for today is on shores afar. I've been watching a number of, like I said the other day, about a South African guy who's going around parts of Europe and especially England. It makes me think how the world has a habit of going round in circles. You could say chasing their own tails, but I see that a little piece on the news yesterday about people, immigrants, because that's what they are. They're not refugees, they're immigrants under the guise of supposedly whatever they can call themselves to enable them to stay in a country that's not where they want to be. Now, if I was born in Africa, the Middle East, where you face every day regimes, toughness, oppression, human nature will allow us to feel we want to escape this. We want a better life for ourselves and our children. But what we're seeing on the news all the time for years now is millions of young men, fighting age young men, coming to Europe and also to the United Kingdom. I say the United Kingdom because Europe is now also part of Ireland, what we used to know as Ireland. Ireland was, in my lifetime, has always been Ireland. They talked about Northern Ireland and Ireland itself. Well, Ireland itself is part of the EU still. But you can literally walk across a field and become part of Northern Ireland, which is English. So no doubt a lot of people who find their way to Ireland, all the way from far-flung places in the Middle East or North Africa, will always be able to hop on a ferry and go to the mainland, England. And there runs the problem. I mean, how is it that England, which is surrounded by water, it is an island after all, just like Ireland is. To get there, you have to go over very hostile seas, very strong current, and a very big shipping lane. But they still risk their lives every day to come there. England, in its wisdom, the politicians, dish out your money to assist the French, maybe the Dutch as well, to limit the access of these rubber boats by boat people, we'll call them, that wish to come to the promised land. Now, why is it a promised land? Ask yourself, if you have half a dozen countries that you could go to, you don't think that they, the ones that are looking for the promised land, decide on what level of promised land do they want to go to? One that maybe puts themselves up in a luxury apartment in an old hotel, provides them with food, provides them with spending money, maybe to buy their smokes from the local store. Which one would you choose? Would you choose one that says, okay, stamp their passport, whatever piece of paper given to them and say, right, off you go, find a job, you can make this your home. But that's what's happened in the world. We've done it. And if you look at what happened in America with the last administration. We don't need to name them particularly, but they decided in their wisdom to open all the borders. They've flooded in, millions of them. Now, every country needs workers. Every country needs skills. And I have no objection to people who decide and have the money to emigrate, that they do it through the proper method. After all, I recall when I first brought my last wife to England to spend a bit of time. I think it was about 6 years we spent there. My son went to school and my wife was able to work. She wasn't able to make use of Social Security. She wasn't able to make use of free medical. We would have had to pay for that. But she was an accompanying wife, spouse visa. After a period of time, she was given indefinite leave to remain. But we did it the right way. We paid for it, we applied. It took nearly 6 months to arrange for it from New Zealand for me to go there. But we did it the right way. But so many now, over the last 20 years now, really, at least, have just seen it as an opportunity to take the prize and achieve the ultimate, which is to live and work and bring up and have more children in the United Kingdom or Europe. You know, you've got your bleeding liberals, and I'm sorry I have to use the word liberals because there isn't anything really comes to mind in terms of a statement. But people who are just so kind with everybody else's money. Oh, leave them alone. They're poor. They're suffering. They need help. We need to offer them. We need to open our hearts. Of course, we have to be humanitarian everywhere in the world. We can't just walk by. We sometimes have to take the role of the Good Samaritan. But now, finally, there's a glimpse of hope when all of the horses have bolted the stable, that now they've decided that maybe enough is enough. They're turning back the boats off of Greece. Sure, the accompanying countries nearby are saying in outrage, how dare they do that? That's not right. Sooner or later, they'll realize that the writing is on the wall. Because you cannot have a group of people, and these are not people from Christian backgrounds. They're not people from an Anglo-Saxon background. These are people from groups that have no relevance to life in the UK or even most parts of Europe. It's easy for everybody to say, well, John, you're being racist, that horrible word. But it's not being racist, it's just common sense. You cannot go and live in Saudi and Iran and expect to replicate life as you knew it in England or in Italy, in these countries. In your mind you can go and absorb the country just like you can come to the Philippines and you can carve out a little bit of what you have. You can build a home that represents to you a lifetime achievement. It can be modeled on the reality of how you saw a home should be, not necessarily following the floor plan of that of a Filipino home, but more akin to your home back home. But essentially, you cannot invade a country just because you feel the need. Because that's what's happening. That is what has happened to Europe. There's literally millions of people who are not part of the culture of any of those countries. You could say that in many ways the EU is to blame. The EU, the idea that they would take down all of the borders, just like the one we can't talk about in America. They took all the borders down, they removed the border posts, and now you can just happily drive from Belgium to Luxembourg, from Luxembourg to Germany, or over the corner to France, into Switzerland, down to Italy, up to Denmark. Now, of course, Denmark at least has a border where they stop you, because even though it's part of Europe, it's not, I believe, part of the EU in that sense. Some of the countries have had the common sense, there's that word common, to decide that they need to have those borders. You need restrictions, you need parameters, you need guidelines in which to live. Society does need them. And you need to know who's coming and who's going. And you can't do that if you allow someone to keep walking across a field or arriving in a boat in the middle of the night. That's not how you keep law and order in a town or a country. But many of these millions of people have established enclaves in various cities around the world, in Europe and in England. And in doing so, they've pushed out the local. Not in a physical sense, but purely because the locals no longer felt safe anymore. They had to sell their house at a reduced rate. Why? Because they didn't want necessarily to live next door to somebody who they felt was maybe, rightly or wrongly, a less desirable neighbour. They felt unsafe with their daughters going out on a Saturday night, never knowing whether she would come home, let alone alive, but in one piece. And that's a terrible way to live your life, to bring up your family, to slowly move from one area to another area where you've never originally thought that you would, to leave behind all of your historical roots, your family, your great-grandfather, in a small town that's now no longer British. And that South African guy that was walking around London and Manchester, Luton, all these well-known places in England, pointed out that the British has gone out of Britain. The feeling of being British. Well, I think that's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but nevertheless, it definitely is pretty well on the cards, because statistics will show you that British people, white, Anglo-Saxon, or even brown Anglo-Saxon, or black Anglo-Saxon, tend to have smaller families now, one and a bit children. I've never actually seen the bit children walking down the street. Maybe they carry them in a handbag. But for the new migrant, economic migrant, I'll put it down to, they're not refugees. Because if you're a refugee from somewhere, let's take Syria as an example. Dreadful loss of life, oppression, terrible place to bring up your children, bombs, groups of rebels with no particular desire to be nice to the locals any more than their own cause that they want to push. And to escape that kind of environment, I can understand why a family would choose to do that. But why is it that the men leave the women and children behind when they're doing it? Do they think that by coming there they can then sponsor the rest of their family? Why? If they're in that much of a trouble situation, would they not bring their whole family with them? Would you not trek the long haul to the next door country where it was a bit more peaceful? And if in fact those countries were prepared to accept them as temporary residents, that is a much better way of handling the situation. As if it's still difficult, because it's going to be difficult on many levels, especially the locals who are trying to make a living. They might say, oh, look at all the extra customers that we've got. But of course the customers have to have money to spend there with them. So it takes time for them. But then they also then challenge the locals for their right to make money too. So you dissipate the power of the locals by the increased competition by newcomers from where they've come from. And here lies the problem that the world has. The world has this problem of being so kind to everybody. We have all these human rights. At the moment we have a massive bureaucracy called the International Criminal Court. Of course that was mainly established after the Second World War to deal with things like the Nuremberg trials, the horrors of the Second World War. But we've had a group of politicians and bureaucrats who've decided that they need a job. So they've created the ICC. And at the moment they're dealing with the latest one, of course, is a fellow citizen of the Philippines, and that is a former president. Rightly or wrongly, they've decided in their opinion that they have the right to bring that person to some form of justice, presuming, of course, that the Philippines doesn't also have that right, if somebody breaks the law here, to bring them to justice here. Who is it that make these decisions? Is it somebody who we never know who these people are? Are they the wheelers and dealers around the world that none of us know their names really? They're clouded in mystery. You know, you don't have to look very far to see the family of the Rockefellers and the people like that who have got so much money and power in the world. They run the world. These people run the world. And we, the hard-earning citizens of each country, have to do what politicians have decided was better for us. They're happy to spend your money, your taxpayers' money that they grab at every chance, while they wine and dine in their little fancy conference halls, sitting there with foreigners serving them their meals, dressed up in little white outfits, spending money on banners so that they can talk to you on the TV each night. These guys have to remember that we gave them the job stupidly. So really, we should be the ones to blame. If you feed people peanuts, you get monkeys, and that's what happens. You know, a lot of these guys you can't always say, well, they've never had a real job. It's probably quite true for the majority. They know somebody who knows somebody who says, come and join the club. And they use the money that they've acquired to assist that person in joining the club. Your money. And therefore, we get what we put there in the first place. You know, I can remember living in New Zealand how years later now I still see the same faces, just not as prominent, but still there, still in politics, years and years and decades later. You know, does anybody know what Helen is doing now? Helen, the former Prime Minister? Does anybody know what Julia Gillard is doing? Does anyone know what Bob Hawke was doing before he passed? They all seem to find themselves a great job after politics when they decide that maybe they can make even more money, talking to us about how wonderful they were when they were in power. And we, the monkeys, the peanut eaters, go and pay money to listen to these people. You know, if you have a housing minister, would you not surely pick somebody who's built a house? Would you not have somebody who has maybe been a plumber, a builder, a construction company owner? Would you not have a doctor, a real doctor who's worked in an emergency department, someone who's dealt with real trauma, run the medical portfolio? Would you not have a pilot running aviation? No, you have a man that used to be on the dole running it, or maybe a homeless man that you decided to give a new suit to, running the Defense Department. When is the world going to wake up? Please, God, please help us. Come down with a bolt of lightning and help the world. We all need to reset the world. We don't need the rich. Why do the rich need to meddle in politics? Why do they need to do that? I have no idea. Let's all try and forget all what I've said and imagine what life is like just being John, a British expat in the Philippines, living the simple life, the less cluttered life, the less problematic life, in a beautiful country. Sure, it has its faults, but it's a lovely place to retire. Bye now.